Eitan, it is so nice to see you. You've been so busy, and I so appreciate the time to chat with me today about speaking and about listening. When,
Absolutely.
when we were introduced, this idea of your being a professional facilitator, professional artist, professional listener, professor, uh, a coach to high level Fortune 100 CEOs. This is fascinating to me. And I'd like you to explain a little bit more about what you do as a context setter for our conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. And my big, the work that I really am focused on is building culture and really conditions for a culture that can innovate. And so, what are those conditions that support a culture to innovate, or be creative, or have new options, or arrive at new conclusions? Lots of ways around this idea of innovation. What does innovation mean? What's supportive to our organization? But in there, speaking and listening is a critical part. If I'm coaching, if I'm modeling by the way I interact with the leader of an organization, if they're then modeling and translating that onwards. So I think one of the key principles is around speaking and listening. And there's that feeds into a lot of the conditions that we need for a culture that can innovate. Maybe one other thing to share is that I run an organization called Making to Think, and Making to Think is that vehicle that delivers the cultural conditions for innovation. And I work uh, at MIT delivering this work for MBAs, for executive education, and for um, some of the research that gets done around culture and communication and the way we organize as adults, adult development. And I'm on McKinsey's think tank for um, the future of work, but it's really advancing adult learning and development. Um, so those are the places that I'm involved in, and yeah, these principles, the idea of speaking and listening, are critical to all.
When you first spoke, you talked about the importance of you modeling good speaking and listening. That's a heavy load. That's a heavy lift to go out there constantly feeling as if you have to be at the best. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, I think that we're all modeling. So at every moment, that's how culture is formed. A lot of leaders say, well, I'm really supporting. That's one of the words they might be using. That I really support my team, or I support my uh, C-suite, or whatever they're doing. And in that support, so tell me more about the support. What are you doing to support? And so some of those things might be the classic, here's our 5 beliefs that we believe in. We really did this extensive study. We asked questions and so on. We found out these are the 5 beliefs that we, or they might write them on the board. Or I say, well, I give my team my resources. I give them resources when I see an idea that I like. We just, so a lot of those things are giving, and like offering and kind of commanding even. And it's like pushed out, not pulling in the team and so on. So what tends to happen in that space is you're not modeling. That's where it comes to. You're actually saying, do these 5 beliefs, and then your team says, oh, well, in their conversation, we're all smart. You hired smart people. So we come in as adults to an environment, and we'll just not model the behavior, but say in our conversation, and aren't we playing right now? Isn't this great? Because play might be one of the things that is a thing. They're not actually playing, but they're referencing the 5 beliefs that they got hired to embody. So I think modeling is when you don't have those 5 beliefs and you're actually doing that thing. And that's where culture happens. The cultural conditions are when everyone is oriented to those things, to the support, not the resources, but actually watching you as the leader communicate with someone else that needs support, or them supporting you, and just modeling how support works. And so they're watching and saying, oh, so that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's kind of what I mean by modeling. So I'm doing it all the time. I do it with my children at home. I do it with my colleagues. I do it in the room when I'm facilitating. And I'm modeling with the leader how they can model onward.
Where do you find time? Do you have a reflection practice? Where do you find your own support to reflect on how you are listening and speaking and growing in your capacity to do so?
That's a great question. I think listening itself is reflection. And I think in every moment you ask a question, I might repeat back to you your question in another way. I'm reflecting on the question in my answer. And so take that moment to say, not what I know, like to respond to you in your question, but just say, huh, what is she really asking? What's going on? What are we communicating about? And so I think listening is a reflective practice. And in that sense, speaking is a reflective practice. So you're responding, you're communicating in relationship. And so my practice, my reflection practice, is actually staying in relationship, both speaking and listening. And maybe another context for that, another place of that is a lot of times we're focused on content. So I'm in a room in a work environment and I have all this stuff that I need to share with you about what's going on, the content, and then receiving content from you. And we're talking about content and we forget that there's you and a me in there and there's a we. So there's two I's and a we. And we forget the relation part because we're so focused on content. And I think the reflective practice is out of there because we're not reflecting. We're just speaking in a third perspective there. Um, Another way to orient around that other thing that's just kind of a silly way of speaking about the same thing is at a wedding. And for example, there's a bride and a groom at a wedding, and everyone there is in relationship to the bride and the groom. And we're all there for the bride and the groom to have a great time. And if they're stressed out and they're nervous and looking around, everything's all they're whatever they're doing, then we all get that way because that's what we're there to support them. So we get all flustered and we're not, in relation to, we are in relation, pardon me, to what they're doing. However, if they're in a place of being happy and reflecting on, so we're immediately, without even verbal cues, non-verbally, entirely in a reflective space. We're speaking about them differently, we're speaking about each other differently, we're connecting to each other, we're holding hands, so that reflection in speaking and listening and communicating, we build a culture around what we're noticing. And I think that's how I practice. It's an actual practice that I'm doing all the time of being in relation to the environment, to the people I'm with, to not the content of what we're saying, but to the relationship of what behind what we're saying.
I would imagine that many of the top leaders that you work with aren't often told the truth. They're used to being told or hearing what people want them to hear. How do you get them to understand that maybe what they're hearing all the time isn't the full truth? And how do you get them open to a culture where more truth can be pulled out and invited from people?
That's a great question. Um, I think trust, truth, relationship is all about not what we know, but what we don't know, especially when the world is moving so quickly. The thing that we hear all the time in all the literature that we are communicating about all the time when we talk about with senior leadership, with big corporations, small entrepreneur, whatever it is, everything's just disruption is happening at speed. And I think that what we can trust, we can't even trust the data anymore because it's changed. By the time I collect enough data that so and so delivered to me, she might not have gotten enough. There's more data out there. So what can we trust? And the only thing we can trust is this back to relationship and modeling and authenticity of the way I am with you. And that builds this culture and this condition that I'm saying, this is what I expect of you. By the way, I'm reflecting your questions, I'm answering, I'm listening deeply, I'm speaking straightforward. Then I'm asking, I'm offering, I am inviting the same in return. And I think that's where the trust is, and trusting the here and now, which is another way to say all the other things I was saying before, which is, and the reflective practice is like, here and now I'm reflecting. Here and now I can trust that. What's in the room, what's available to us right now, and trusting that I don't know. If I'm innovating and things are changing, then I have to trust that I know all these things and that I don't know all these other things, and the person I'm speaking with might not know. And so I think inviting more of not knowing um, is really healthy, and being able to speak about what we don't know. And goodness, the world doesn't know, because if it existed, we would have had the solution. So I hired you, even though I'm leading you, whatever that might mean to a person. But we have to lead each other. We have to trust each other. And that's the only way we're going to come up with a solution. And we have to live in the not knowing and use that to to lead us. Yeah.
How'd you get so smart at this? How'd you go from being, yeah, tell me a little bit about your path, right? You're cross-cultural artist. How did you get here?
It's great. It's kind of you to say so smart about this. And I just, I don't know if I'm so smart. I just know that I don't know a lot of things, and I'm asking a lot of questions all the time, and that I have to model this as well. And I think what am, I can confidently say I feel comfortable, confident, and good at is leading people into the unknown. And the way the my path to leading in the unknown, leading in the uncertain, um, knowing what to do when I don't know what to do, is my path to doing that and to coaching people in that world was art. If you know what the final painting is going to be before you start painting, why would you make the painting? And on the way, what do you know about painting? How are you an expert at painting? And then, goodness, like, what do I not know? And then working with other people who are in deeply in that space, other artists, and asking them, well, what do they do? And how do they do that? And that was my doctorate work, came from asking people who have built a culture around innovating. So in the arts world, in music, in painting, in drawing, in dance, in writing, creative writing. And these groups of people are experts in their domain, in a field of study, and they're experts at this other thing that's associated deeply with that. That's a 3,000-year-old tradition. It's not new. It's been refined, evolved, and is a practice of conditions that allow them to create their masterpiece as they're doing it. It's not that an artist wakes up one morning and says, I'm going to create a masterpiece. I certainly don't know any artist that wakes up and says, today I'm not going to create a masterpiece. We all want to wake up, and artist or not, and today's the day I'm going to make my masterpiece. What artists are, I think, uniquely evolved in, and oftentimes if we ask them, they don't know they're doing it, they're just practicing. Now my doctorate was kind of pulling out the procedures, the process, the methods, the pedagogy behind what it is that you do there, and how do you teach this, because I was for many years teaching in a graduate level in different countries, that all and different practices of arts. So there's a huge different cultural approach to what is creativity. How do I teach creativity? How do I coach a creative person who is now getting their master's in this program um, of some sort? How to then continue a lifelong practice of disrupting not the market, not painting, not music, whatever, but disrupting themselves and arriving at a conclusion that they would never have thought of. How do you coach that? A lifelong practice of that. And so from that expertise, I was able to pull out processes, take the instruments away, take the clay away, take the paintbrushes away, and say, can we now insert this process in other fields and other domains and give them a practice? And so with that, I also have spent the last, let's say, about 5 years with some of the world's experts in adult development and who train and who build in developmental practice. How do we learn, organize, develop, communicate as adults, and kind of speak with these experts on the theories, so on, which is really great in the academic world to learn about that. And also, I'm really a practitioner. So all the theories, even that I know about art, my goal is to take those theories. My practice for 2 decades has been taking those theories and implementing them every day in different formats in different ways. That's what an artist is doing, and that's what the corporate world is doing. They're doers. They have to do, and they have to do fast, and they have to do yesterday, and they have to do. It's changing, and they're going to be disrupted at any moment. And so, how do we give them practical, concrete, tangible tools, uh, conditions to build a culture that can innovate at speed of change?
And in the midst of this study of pedagogy of adult learning, you became a parent. Um,
Also,
how's that changing up what you know and your sense of uh, disrupting oneself to innovate?
unbelievable. So I am so. It's a great question. We were speaking about this earlier. Like my biggest gift is the culture I have with my partner, my wife, and our way of things are changing. What are we going to do? And it's not problem solving, it's just attending to the culture rather than to a problem. I think I don't know what a great parent is. I have models, people that love and who I've seen do it in wonderful ways. But with that, I notice that when we tend to one problem or one challenge, or this is going to be the thing that makes or breaks my child, or this is going to be, oh goodness, this is the decision I have to make, and we put that pressure on every decision, which is very similar to what I notice in corporate organizations. It's so fascinating how they're watching the center of gravity. My experience has been the child is watching. If you get 80% of the stuff right, then they're going to get 80% of the stuff right, whatever that right means. And when you get it wrong, if you're able to say, oh, you know, dad made a mistake. Oh, this happened. Oops, look what happened now. And you're able, I learned from Mr. Rogers, you know, and what I loved is one moment in Mr. Rogers that really struck me that even as an adult now with kids of my own, I can remember viscerally this moment where he was making bubbles in a little bowl of water, and he put a little bit of soap in there. He had a straw, and he was blowing into this, and he was making bubbles. And he puts a little soap in, and he makes bubbles, and no bubbles are happening. And he puts another dab of soap in, and he does it again. Bubbles aren't happening. And he gets frustrated, even like a little bit mad. He says, this is really frustrating because it's supposed to work. Now, he goes through his whole experience and he talks about his frustration and how it's not working. And finally, he blows bubbles and it does work. But I think in today's world, we would have cut and edited that part out. Even in that time, a bunch of years ago, he would have cut that out. Why would you share the flop? But he chose to keep it in there, keep the video running, because there's learning in there, and maybe the best learning. So it's not to avoid mistakes happening, but it's what happens when a mistake does happen, and what do you do with that? And that's even when I'm coaching executives, it's so much of the same. It's I'm not going to help coach you out of mistakes. You're going to keep making mistakes, but when they do happen, you're going to be more prepared, more equipped, and your team and your culture will be ready to deal with mistakes the way you are going to do it by practicing these things.
Do you have any advice on how one could communicate more easily or even just more truthfully with people that are trying?
That's such a great question, because especially those people happen to always be the people that you work with. I mean, they're always like the one person that you went to college with that you never want to see again, that drove you nuts, happens to be your right hand man or woman right next to you. You're in relationship and you have to work together. I mean, it happens to always be the case. And this is the way the world works. But with that, I think, my orientation is always to what are the cultural conditions for innovation. So how do you work together, not just to get by, but to actually arrive at something new, supportive, that adds value to yourselves, your team, your organization, the market, so on. I think that, I get a lot of questions or uh, conversations. We really work well together. We can collaborate great. It's just when we disagree, what do we do? And what I say to them is, actually, you're not collaborating until you disagree. Just want you to know. And like, what do you mean? So I think that what I'm saying about the challenge part is that to innovate, we need two things, right? One thing is you need a lot of perspectives, different perspectives from people who are different than you in some way. And ideally in many ways, at the table. So you need all the different perspectives, and that's only half of it. Then, now you got all the perspectives, but then you can't pick the two things you agree about, that you're happy about, and go there. You actually need to negotiate and work in the conflict, in the mess, in the complexity, in the challenge of, well, one of us is going to be wrong. Maybe half of us are going to be wrong. Maybe third. And I'm really pushing that word wrong right now just to make a point, but it's really not wrong, just not right now, or it's going to be done differently. And then we have to look at something greater than ourselves and learn how to work in that complexity. And so when you're meeting that complexity, when you're working with someone who is really looking at things different than you, and you say, well, this is the beginning of catalyzing something great. How do you do that? And so where I get into is one way to kind of work with this, if there's a lot of context and complexity in this, but if I was going to say one thing really short, is finding the part of that person that is in you. What do I mean by that person, that perspective? Is like, if I'm super liberal about some idea and someone is super conservative about an idea, and I don't mean politics, I just mean in general, and the way we communicate, or it might be different generations in a workplace, or different, whatever it is, perspectives of how to use resources, or so on. Well, what part of me right now, say I'm the liberal side, I'm just going to use that for this example, but if I'm from the liberal side, what part of me right now is being super conservative and not allowing any of your ideas to be in this liberal space? So what I mean is, like, you're so conservative that you don't belong here. We have lots of ideas. What am I doing in that word? What is going on in what I just said? I'm actually stopping you. I'm not being liberal. There's no space for your conservative stuff in my space. Oh, wait a minute. I'm actually conservative. There's a part of me that's actually so I'm finding the space where I actually understand what you're seeing when you're looking at me. And what part of that conservative person from that angle is doing so what I'm saying is finding the moment where the opposite or the polarity of what you're doing is in you can really liberate a lot of opportunities for the both of you to communicate and arrive at some new conclusion that neither of you even knew was going on. So that's a cultural condition that you can work on. Yeah.
Thank you very much.